episode 1 part 2 of a beginner's guide to mixing metal at home. Part 2 we're going to be covering the toms and cymbals to go along with the snare and kick that we covered in part 1. Toms and cymbals are a bit simpler, shouldn't take too long to get through, so let's get right down to it. First of all, the toms. I'll just give a quick overview of my tom setup there. Being a metal kit I'm using here, there are lots of toms. I've got the high, mid, low, mid, 2 different floor toms. Most metal kits will tend to have a lot of toms. The drummers like to use them. Equalising them is fairly straightforward. If we listen to them dry, we will see there's quite a lot of messy frequencies involved with toms, especially as there's different tunings running from high to low. Obviously they cover a fairly broad spectrum of frequencies, and some of it gets a bit messy, and it's nice to tidy that up and remove some of the less pleasant sounds. 2 ways of doing this. The easiest way is a bit of EQ. I'll show you this first of all. I am again going to use a stock Cubase. This is the channel EQ. This is basically what you would want to be doing to your toms. As you can see, I've rolled off below 100 Hz. We don't need any of that in there. I've given it a small boost just after 100 Hz. That's just after where the kick would boost, just so that it's not clashing too much. That would be for the low toms. Taking out a fairly good scoop of the mids there from 200 really all the way up to about 2000, 2500. That's quite messy sounding on the toms. It's nice to get rid of some of that. And then again a bit of a boost in the high end, around 5-6k, depending on the type of drum kit you're using. That will again give it a bit of clicky noise to help it cut through. And if we hear how these toms sound with and without the EQ, I'll turn it off again quickly. And here we go. This is dry, and then with, you can see it's given it a bit more definition. It's got rid of those mids that make it a bit muddy, and yeah, clean it up quite nicely actually. I myself though don't tend to use this because I actually invested in one piece of kit which I would highly recommend, and I've got it inserted here already. This is the infamous Waves C4 multiband compressor, and if you're going to buy one piece of more expensive kit, this would be the piece to buy. It's one of those pieces of kit that you plug in somewhere and something automatically sounds better before you've even touched any of the parameters. It's widely used by people of all levels. There's a forum, Ultimate Metal Forum, has its own sub-forum for the producer Andy Sneap, who you will probably have heard of if you're into your heavy metal. He has even published presets of his own for this particular piece of kit because it's just really good. As I say, everything you put through it can sound great. As with all multiband compressors though, you do have to be careful not to overdo it because you can squish things too much, and like any of these VSTs, if you overuse them, overprocess things, they'll sound rubbish no matter how expensive or good the piece of kit is. So what have I done here? I've effectively done a similar thing to the EQ. I've stripped out a lot of the low mids, I've boosted the bass a bit, and I've boosted the high end a bit. I can't roll off the bottom end, I haven't got enough parameters to give me that option here. Not really necessary because I've also compressed it using this piece of kit. I don't need to roll off the low ends because they're not going to boom through too much. If we have a listen now, make sure the EQ is turned off, which it is. So this is the dry toms, and this is the toms with the compressor. To my ears that just sounds a bit better than the EQ'd version. The EQ'd version isn't bad, it's an improvement on the dry, but by adding in a multiband compressor, especially a quality one like the C4, you really can get some nice beefy powerful tones, even though you've stripped out a lot of the low mids and mids. This retails at the moment for about $150, about £110–120 I believe, and as I say, if you're going to buy one piece of kit, make this the piece. Okay, on to cymbals. And cymbals are also fairly straightforward. I'll bring up Easy Drummer again quickly just so you can have a quick look. As you can see, again, like many heavy metal kits, this one is absolutely rammed with different types of cymbals, chinas, rides, hats, splashes, all sorts. I like using different ones in there, a lot of metal drummers do as well. But again, they can all be treated very similarly, and they all go through this one overhead channel here. And really all you need to add to cymbals is a bit of EQ just to tidy it up slightly. If we listen to this dry, it's a bit dull. It needs to be brightened up a bit. Very easily done. Turn on an EQ, bring this one over here, it's the 30 bands we were using earlier on. I've stripped out everything below 200 Hz, you just don't need it there. A lot of the time there won't even be any frequencies down that low, but you're not really interested in there. The cymbals, what they are doing is giving you dynamics and interest in the higher end of the spectrum, so we get rid of that low stuff. That's for the toms and for the kick. High end, you can see I've just boosted around 6 dB, everything from 2.5K upwards. I've also identified, it's worth taking note of how your individual cymbals behave. I've stripped out a bit between 1 and 2K because I noticed there was just some frequencies that were resonating in not so nice a way, so I dropped them out a bit as well. It's always worth checking your whole set of frequencies and see if there's anything that's standing out as resonating in a bit of a nasty way. Pull it down a bit. You can often clean up a mix really well doing that. Anyway, let's have a listen and see what that's done. So we've got the dry sound and with, and hopefully you can notice that's may help it cut through a lot. Now that is all that we need when it comes to toms and cymbals. Very straightforward. So having covered all of the main instrument groups, we now have to send it all to one stereo bus so that we can mix it together, make it sound as tight yet as realistic as possible. To help with the realism, I have two more muted tracks here which I haven't covered. Just very briefly, these create room ambience in Drum Kit from Hell. Most VSTs will have this sort of thing. It just adds a bit more space to it all. If I just play the kit as it is without them there, this is the full kit for the first time that we're hearing, and I'll unmute the ambience. It's subtle, very subtle. You don't want too much of that in metal anyway, because the more you have, the more mud you'll introduce, and we don't want mud in metal. It doesn't sound good. All of these purple tracks, Drum Kit from Hell, and the drum snare auxiliary track, we are sending to one bus, Drum Kit from Hell output, and we only need to apply really one thing to this, and that is a bit more compression to bring it all together nicely. And I use one of two. The good news is they're both free. First one, this is probably one of the loveliest looking VSTs I've come across. This is a drum compressor called the Density Mark II, Density MK2. If you Google that, it's free and it's very good. It's I forget the guy's name. I'm going to have to put it in the description below the video to give him his dues. He creates a lot of different VSTs. I've got a few on here. We'll be covering a couple more that I use in the bass and the guitar section. For now, this is basically just a very nice tight compressor. Enhances the sound really well, maintains the dynamic range. So let's see, we'll get this playing. This is the full kit without any compression, and if I add this in, you can hear there it just gives everything a bit more punch. But it's quite subtle. It's a good piece of kit. That's really good when you've got a song with quite a wide dynamic range and you don't mind the large dynamics of the drums. I'll be talking more about this in a second after I introduce the second VST that I tend to use on drums. Never together these, it's either one or the other. This is another free piece of kit called the Endorphin by the company digitalfishphones.com. They give away a lot of free stuff, and this is a brilliant piece of kit. This is effectively like a volume maximizer, but it tends to be a slightly higher quality than maximizers. A lot that people don't like about maximizers is that it can really degrade the sound quite quickly if you overuse them. This Endorphin, they've tried to get round that by giving you a few more options than just pumping the volume as loudly as possible. It splits the signal into low, which will affect your kick and your toms, and the high, which will affect the high end of the snare and the cymbals obviously. So you can mix them separately, change your input and output drive levels, the amount of saturation as well, which gives it a bit more of a nice analog feel, and you can compress the low end and the high end separately as well. So you've got a few more options than a normal volume maximizer, such as the one that comes with Cubase, or something famous like the Waves L2. Let's have a quick look. If I reset that, we'll see what the Endorphin sounds like. We've got the dry here without any compression, and if I add this in, that is a nice, powerful effect that's giving there. It really adds some power to the drums. The problem with the Endorphin is that, being a limiter as well, you can really pump that high and not realise that you're already over processing, so do be careful. And if we look down here, I've got an example for you. If we look at these waveforms, we've got the density here. You can still see there's quite a wide dynamic range when I've bounced this down. You can still see the snares very easily poking out. That's great when you want your dynamics, but for particularly heavy tracks where you want to maybe reduce that dynamic range, these snares would help you overstep and start clipping, so it's nice to be able to level them out a bit. So this is all well and good for maybe a not so heavy song where you can afford to hear more dynamics in the drums, but where you need to squish it all down and reduce those peaks, this is what the Endorphin does. And as you can see, it's much harder to pick out the snares from the other sort of louder sounds, almost distinguishable, but some of these louder kicks maybe and some loud tom rolls and stuff are pretty much the same level, so it evens things out. You don't get so many occasional snare peaks poking through and making life difficult for you later on down the line. So really personal choice, but I would use the Endorphin for a heavier track, and the density where you've got a lighter track and you can afford a bit more space for the drums. That concludes our drums here. The next episode will be discussing the bass.